Anna, are you there? This is Craig. Josh, can you hear me? How does the volume sound here? It's good. Hopefully. Yeah, maybe. Can you hear me? How does the So Anna, Just let me know in the text there when you'd like me to start, and I'll be happy to do so. Excuse me. So I'm going to thumbs up on getting started. Why don't we get started? Go to the slides here. Hello, everyone. I'm Craig Cummings. I'm actually a part of Unicode. So I was debating whether I'd put my glorified titles here on the screen or not. But you should probably know that I am part of Unicode, and I wear a number of hats at the Unicode Consortium. One of those is Technical Committee Chair. The Technical Committee is the one that puts characters into Unicode and also maintains the Unicode standard. My second overglorified title there is that I work with our national standards body in the United States with the International Standards Organization, and Unicode and ISO maintain synchronization through that. I also work as part of our Emoji subcommittee. So if you know Unicode for anything, hopefully you can see the second slide here, and you know Unicode for emoji. So here's a few emoji I have worked on, animal emoji. We'd really like and are hoping that you know Unicode for all the characters, all the writing systems and the characters of those writing systems that are in Unicode. And those are writing systems for all things modern and ancient. Here's a poster of that was produced recently. And those things in blue are actually already in Unicode, and those things in red are things we still have to work on. So we have our work cut out for us here. Now, the thing that you may not know Unicode for, every time you turn on your smartphone, for example, or if you're looking at a desktop or laptop, likely it has a time and date displaying on the screen there. And that is actually part of Unicode as well. So Unicode is now more than just characters. It's actually a lot of pieces for building software that works around the world and works in a number of different languages. We have, there's about 4,000 written languages. So written languages are particularly interesting to us. And we have about 1,000 of those that we're supporting right now. So we, again, have our work cut out for us. There's about 3,000 to go there. Here is one on the right-hand side of the screen, actually is Lakota being displayed, and not very well by iPhone. And I like that little try again at the bottom of the screen there. Try again, iOS. But they got close. They almost displayed the month, day name, and month name in Lakota. And so we're getting closer. We're getting better. Actually, if this were Cherokee or if this were Quechua or a language like that, an indigenous language like that, this would display a little better. I probably should have picked a better example than Lakota. But what I really want to talk to you today about is how do we get these languages on computers, and how can you help with that? And there are three pieces that are involved there. And those are fonts and keyboards, and this little piece called Unicode CLDR data. And that's Common Locale Data Repository. That's what that stands for, and I should have spelled that out. But for those of you, if you're not already with fonts, that's a piece of software that helps characters display. The keyboards, there's actually physical keyboards, and if you have a desktop or laptop, you have those in front of you. If you have a tablet or a smartphone or something like that, then that's a little more, that's now a piece of software that allows you to input characters. And then the CLDR piece, and this is probably the easier piece of these three to do. The CLDR piece is again a piece of software made by Unicode that contains the data, and it's actually the data that you just saw on the screen and more. It's the dates, the times, the number format, the currency format, other things like that, time zones, more. There's lots of localizations in there, but it's also about just getting certain pieces for global software to work correctly. This slide is actually, it's an eye chart. It's intended for you to have difficulty reading, so don't be too frustrated there. At the top of it, you can actually go to this link. You can go to it now. You can go to it later if you'd like. What I want you to take away from this is, while some of our Unicode documentation is actually written quite well, this needs a little more work, and this is written in geek speak. And so what I'm going to do as part of this presentation is hopefully translate that for you into hopefully some plain English here, and we can take it from there. But I also want you to note that there's 7 steps here, because we're going to talk about those 7 steps for getting core XML data. Notice there's some other steps for getting the minimal, all of the minimal parts, but the 7 steps here for the core XML data is the starting point, if you will, for getting data into CLDR and then getting that onto computers. So here's those first 7 steps. Let's actually, this is hopefully a little more readable to you. Let me actually go over to the Facebook comments and see if everybody is able to read things, and hopefully it's all coming through there. You can see the 7 steps, yeah. Those are, so firstly, the characters themselves. And it's probably good for me to go to my next slide, and we'll come back to steps 2 through 7, because the next slide shows you what those exemplar characters look like. So here is an application. When you get those 7 steps done, there's a tool called Survey Tool, and this is the CLDR Survey Tool, and it has a much better interface for letting you look at data that happens to be a part of CLDR. And in this case, these are the exemplar characters here, and it actually breaks down into about 5 different groups. The main letters are, the A through Z, and your language may be different. It may have more characters or fewer characters. You can see actually Lakota has more characters than A through Z, and some things are missing. So Lakota actually uses the Latin script, and but it could use it could be used in auxiliary. So now we're talking about those auxiliary characters with other languages. So there's actually a couple English characters in here as well. And the index part of this is if you were to take a dictionary or a grammar book or any book and turn to the back of the book, you would see an index in there. And the index is often sorted, A to Z for English, a different way for other languages. And the index indicates, what those letters are for providing that index. For those of you who are working with indigenous languages that use the Latin script, your data is probably going to look a lot like this, and your numbers and your punctuation, these other two other pieces of exemplar characters, are going to look a lot like this. But let's talk a little more about the other pieces as well. So you probably know what the exemplar characters are for your language, and you've got step number one taken care of. You're done already, practically. These other steps should be fairly easy because you probably know which way your language displays on a screen or is written in books. And there's left to right, there's right to left, there's actually top to bottom, there's bottom to top. And there are some other interesting writing directions that languages can display or are written. And we can do a lot of that actually on computers. And there's a specification with the core XML data for that. So that's number two taken care of. With the plural rules, step number 3 here is probably one of the more interesting steps. Many languages don't have the concept of plural, but some do. Some are interesting, like English, and have only a couple cases where there's 1 duck or 2 ducks, and words change there. And particularly nouns, ordinals change there. But some languages, particularly some languages I've taken a look at recently, indigenous languages I've looked at recently, change verbs, but not necessarily nouns. So this gets interesting, and plural rules should not be the gating factor, but if you can provide that information as well, the closer you are to getting your language on computers. The script in the country language, remember I talked about my overglorified title of working with the International Standards Organization. They have a specification, a standard for how scripts and countries should be represented. You can actually look up your language in Wikipedia and see how that's represented. And usually there will be an ISO abbreviation for the script in the country. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to skip ahead there. And likewise, step number 4 and 5 are pretty easy to figure out. And usually it's a combination of some 2 or 3 letter abbreviated scripts, actually 4-letter abbreviated scripts, and 2 or 3 letter languages, and maybe a country that's the country can actually vary. It's 2 or 3, sometimes more characters. Anyway, pretty easy to cover steps 4 and 5. For those of you, again, working with Latin-based languages, there's a title case, and casing is all about, is it lowercase, is it uppercase, is it title case where just the first character happens to be capitalized? Does it even have capitalization or small letters, a lowercase form at all? And these are important to specify. The collation, so step number 7, actually, if you do step number 1 in sorted order, collation is a fancy word for sorting, then you've taken care of all these 7 steps, and now you're a good bit closer. You've got that minimal data, if you will. You've got the first 7 steps of the minimal data that we just looked at, and you now have enough information to get a much better interface to enter the remainder of the minimal data. And so what does that remainder look like? Well, let me get you to this slide, and while you're looking at that, I'm going to go quickly look at comments and see if everybody's getting along through the slides fairly well. Hopefully that's working for everybody. Back to the slides here. So that remainder of the minimal data ends up just being a number of translations, and a lot of those are for month names and day names, and they're abbreviations. And it's interesting, some languages don't have a concept of month and day names. Some languages don't have a concept of the abbreviation, but do have the month and day names. And for the time being, we're going to use the Gregorian calendar, and that being, so January, February, March for months, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for day names. And most of you, a lot of the language I've seen have a translation for at least the months and days. So there's most of your strings right out of the way pretty quickly. There are those that do not. And like I said, we're going to deal with the Gregorian calendar right now, but you should know that actually computers right now are supporting a large number of calendars all over the world: Persian calendars, Taiwanese calendars, Chinese calendars, Buddhist calendars, Japanese calendars. There are a number actually available on computers right now. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could do more calendars, and particularly those for indigenous languages. You know, in California, where I'm based, you know, we could actually have, instead of September, we could have a time when acorns fall. But we're not quite there yet, but we can get there. For the moment, though, let's just try and get the language on computers, and then we can finesse it and really capture more of the culture and some better things. But we're going to leave that for the future at the moment and get to this next part, which is a few more translations here. And then you're actually done with the minimal data for CLDR. And you're better positioned to have your language get on computers. And I'm going to tell you a little more about how that works. But let's just work through these last translations here. So the name of the language in the language. So for example, in Japanese, that would be Nihongo. In Osage, that would be Wajaje. And whatever it happens to be for you, you probably spell that out in Latin script or other characters, and you're done. A few more translations here for units of time and date. And then some crazy translations for these last 6 strings. And that is all the minimal data you need in CLDR to get your language on computers. There is certainly more you can do in CLDR, and if you were to take a look at the survey tool, and here again is the survey tool. We're looking at Lakota. Here are the Lakota months. And you can go to the link st.unicode.org, and you can start looking at other languages and all the data that's there in CLDR. You don't have to do more than that minimal data to get your language on a computer, but there's that opportunity to go further if you would like. And so there's more in terms of date formats and time formats and currencies and time zones and translations of other languages of the world in your own language. And so there's a lot more data that you could provide, but really right now, we just like to get a lot more languages on computers and then take it further. Here happens to be some of those day names in Lakota, and I could have picked Cherokee or Quechua or a few other indigenous languages that are there already and shown you examples of that. But again, you have the link, and I encourage you to go take a look at this and see that data. And then I wanted to share just a couple of things on what that looks like and how that might be meaningful to you. So, and before I knew what cultural appropriation was, I have been a big fan for giving credit where credit is due, and I'm going to credit the Cherokee Nation here. You know, it has been a success for Unicode that we have had Cherokee in there for over a decade now, and that the Cherokee Nation worked so very hard to put Cherokee, and it works so well for them. But I'm going to let you watch the YouTube here, and that link is at the bottom there. Oops, sorry, getting ahead. This is Roy Boney from the Cherokee Nation. I'm going to let him tell the story himself. I wish I had more time here to share that with you, but suffice it to say that the Cherokee Nation has really worked hard to get their language working well on computers, and not just working with Unicode, but working with, you know, then the vendors making operating systems like the Windows and Apples and Googles of the world, and people making the hardware, and you know, you can turn any computer on now, and Cherokee is in that list of languages that looks like something like this. So, you know, this is the language list on my Mac desktop here, but you have a similar one on your smartphone, on your tablet, on your laptop, wherever you might be looking. And, you know, it's great to start seeing your language be here. I think it's probably one of the most powerful things that Unicode and other work with the vendors, work to get your language being represented on computers. You know, when you start seeing it here, that just, it's so meaningful for me. I'd like to think it's meaningful for everybody else. I'm sure it was meaningful for the Cherokee folks when, you know, Cherokee appeared here in this list of choices. And now notice down here, Cherokee dates start working, and Cherokee times start working, and more. So Anna asked me to put together a slide on how do you get started putting your language on a computer. Okay, so we know that, backing up, we know that fonts are required. We know that keyboards are required. We know keyboards, their layouts are actually part of CLDR. So really, it's fonts and some CLDR. To do the CLDR, you saw that there's first these 7 steps that are the, a good part of getting started, a good part of that minimal data. And there's actually another little tool here that allows you to file a ticket. You go into the ticket, you type in those 7 pieces of information and say, please put my language, whatever that might be, on computers, and certainly in CLDR. There's a couple references here I have for Osage and Muskogee that I have worked on recently. So you could take a look at these as examples or references that in making your own. If there's parts of those you don't understand, here's my email address. Feel free. I'm guessing there's probably going to be some questions. I'll try and answer them here in our broadcast. But if I don't, reach out to me, ping me with your questions. If you start getting ahead here and file a CLDR ticket for your language to be added to computers, and you have those 7 pieces that we just talked about, go ahead and do so. That's great. Do send me that ticket number so I can track it and I can help prioritize it and I can help nudge people to make sure your language gets there. Now, all that work that I might do, I should say that I don't work for the vendors, so I don't work for Microsoft, I don't work for Apple, I don't work for Google. And just because there's CLDR data for your language does not guarantee that it will be on computers, but it probably won't get there without the CLDR data, and this is a great step towards that. Now, some caveats for number 2 here. There are some, Unicode, like I said, has a lot of writing systems, hundreds of writing systems for thousands, well, over 1,000 languages in it right now. But it may not have your writing system in there. Hopefully it does. If it does not, then we have to sort of take a step back and we have to do a writing system proposal for your writing system. And then once it's in Unicode, then we can get a little further on getting it onto computers. If your writing system is already there, and then you're ready to go to CLDR. And if it's Latin, you don't need fonts because there's actually good Latin fonts on pretty much every modern device already. If you need some help with fonts, Unicode isn't in the font business, but we have lots of members who are, and we can help point you in the right direction to make some fonts. Again, that Osage example, we had lots of fonts there that we've created now, but they didn't have anything to start with. So there was some work to do to actually get some fonts working, and fonts that, well represented their characters. Also, CLDR has a couple times a year where you can add, where data officially gets added. We can work on languages any time of the year, but there's 2 times where it gets released, and that's when the Googles, Apples, and Microsofts of the year pick that up and they put them on their operating systems. And if you don't get the data perfect, that's okay. We'd like to get, as many bugs banged out as we can between releases so that by the time of a release, your data is as good as it can be for your language. But things change. You may need to go back and correct something. You may need to add something in the future, and that's okay. CLDR, it has the ability that we can make changes, we can make additions. When I'm talking about CLDR, when I'm talking about languages on computers, I wasn't talking about this 3rd bullet point of localization. So you can go even further. If we look back here, notice that certain things were in Cherokee here, but not everything was translated. Not everything was localized. There is more work that you can do on computers. That's a little outside of the scope of CLDR, but it's something that can be done, and something that has been done for a number of other languages. So it's in the realm of the possible, and happy to talk to you more about that. I wish there were more time here, but localization is the next step after you really need to get on the computers first, and then you can localize. And I wish that the last bullet point here, the last caveat, I wish that the standards process worked a bit better, worked a bit quicker. It does take time. And so though what I just showed you in only a few minutes here may take, maybe an hour to prepare those 7 pieces of minimal data. Actually, probably all of the minimal data, if you happen to have that pretty close to your fingertips or memorized, or that is your language, it should not take you actually too long to prepare that. Maybe just an hour, maybe a day. It will take longer to actually get your language on computers. And so there's also some steps that we go through, in addition to creating a font, in addition to putting your writing system in there if it's not already. There's a lot of care. Unicode is now, every piece of text that you look at, every piece of text in the slide, every piece of text that you're looking at on your device, whether that be a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, a smartphone, every piece of text is actually Unicode, which means that we want that text to continue to work very well, and we have to look at that very carefully every time we do a release of anything. And so that time to put that extra care in to make sure things that already are working do not break, that takes some time as well. And we want to make sure that continues that Unicode and text in particular, and all those, the dates and times and numbers and format, the other pieces of Unicode also work well. But we also want to make sure that the new languages that we're going to be adding work well too. So there's some time that this takes. And this is actually my last slide. I'm going to go back to the Facebook page here and see what comments and questions you might have. But at this point, I'm going to open it up to questions. So please go ahead. I'm also going to read back a little and see if there were any questions that might have come up. Okay, looks like Anna's commenting about calendars, and yeah, I can't wait to get to more calendars, but I'm all about getting the languages on computers and mobile devices, smartphones, tablets first, and then we're going to get to better calendaring. What about dialects of the same languages in one language? There's a question about that. That's a very good question. Dialects, you can probably put a number of things. You could overload the CLDR data with that. You can actually create different variants of a language country kind of thing for that dialect. So that's another possibility. The computers aren't dealing with that too well right now, so overloading the CLDR data piece is probably the best way. But there are also languages out there I'd like to point out, like I was working with Choctaw recently. It has 4 orthographies. I think 3 are still reasonably in use, maybe just 2. And those are those can be represented in CLDR. They can be represented on computers. We can get them all working. There's some subtleties about the best road towards that, but it can be done. Josh has a question, sorry, about how the digitization of vertical scripts are handled. Josh, that's another conversation, and probably a long one. There's actually a number of things built into Unicode, and parts of the operating system, parts of your browser, parts of other pieces of computers here that make that work. But I'm happy to take that offline and talk more about it. Let's see. What other? Osiris has a really interesting comment about calendar systems here. Again, we can do more calendars. We can do lunar. We can do solunar. We can do solar. We can do more. The limitations are probably only in our imagination, and the computers have a good capability to do a number of these systems right now. What we haven't done is actually written, say, a California Miwok calendar that says we only have 4 celebrated times of the year, when the flowers come out, when the streams run full, when the acorns fall, things like that. But these are possibilities. CLDR right now is a bit strict. It likes 12 months, it likes 7 days, but this is not to say that it can't be changed for these calendar systems in the future. I don't know if there's any other questions, but again, Craig@unicode.org. Feel free to reach out. Happy to help with what I can. And I will say, I'm hoping a lot of you reach out to me, particularly to tell me you've got your languages. There's a new ticket for your languages. But if you have questions as well, I should let you know I have this day job that gets in the way of my otherwise Unicode fun. I will try to be as responsive as I possibly can. There are some other good people with Unicode I might point you to. We're all volunteers, actually. So please bear with us. We will help you as much as we can and get you towards that goal. Any other questions? The Facebook stream seems a little quieter. Can we add shortcuts? Irvin asks if we can add shortcuts for putting in diacritics. Yes, if the shortcuts have, I think you're talking about actually adding those to keyboard, so you have input now that could make it easier to put in diacritics, and yes, that is possible. And so if those shortcuts are keyboard shortcuts that you're talking about, yes, that's possible. Okay, so the Circle of Indigenous Peoples asks, when I say country, actually, I should probably be more correct and say a region. So things can cross borders, things can cross continents, things can cross areas. Probably the better term would be region. Some of those regions are well identified and enumerated and easy to make computers understand them, and some need a little work still. So it depends on what you're talking about there. But it should not be a gating factor for getting a language on a computer. Hope that helps. Other questions? It looks a little quiet at the time. Anna, should we? I'm going to, again, repeat my email, Craig@Unicode. If you have any questions, again, I'd welcome those. Unicode would welcome those. We look forward to working with you and getting your languages on computers. And I may just leave it at that. Other than to say thanks everybody for their time. So I'm probably going to end it here. Thanks everybody.